Right, we're going to talk about education now. It's the second largest area of public spending, and ahead of the general election, as you will know, we've been looking at some of the biggest issues in schools and higher education.
As part of the BBC's Your Voice, Your Vote, our education editor Branwen has been talking to teachers, pupils and their families in Yorkshire about what matters to them the most.
Verdadero o falso?
This is where education is built, in the classroom.
Muy bien.
And England has a shortage of teachers. Teachers' pay is among the first decisions facing a new government. Natalie, like many others, has been feeling the cost of living.
We look at sort of where we can get clothes either second-hand or in a sale, as opposed to being able to just go out and buy what the children need at that time. I have considered leaving teaching. I do look at what is available, what other jobs I could do, because actually what I'd like is a better work-life balance around my children.
While new teachers' pay is now £30,000, experienced teachers' pay has fallen 11% since 2010, once rising costs are factored in.
How many ways can you make 100?
This school in Leeds has put ads for teachers' jobs on hold. Pay is their biggest bill, and they don't yet know what it will be in September.
There's a gap, a chasm of difference there. We're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds for a medium-sized secondary school. The difference between the funding that's been so far promised and what teacher pay rises are likely to be.
Spending for each pupil in England, because costs have gone up, is worth no more than 14 years ago, despite the extra challenges. Schools are also still dealing with some of the legacy of COVID. More children with mental health issues, attendance far below what it was before.
I've got something in my bucket.
At this school, they make time and space for children who need extra help. To get funding in future, they'll have to apply for a care plan for each. How to pay for special educational needs is another big looming challenge after the election. In Sheffield, Kerry wants more help for her 6-year-old son, Halen. He's only managing school a couple of hours a day. To be sure of more support, Kerry wants his needs reassessed.
You've got to choose to be happy or your situation would destroy you. It's not working at all. So many parents are they're just in survival, everything is a fight that doesn't need to be if the right things were put in place.
There's been a 60% increase in education, health and care plans since 2015, setting out the legal right of a child or young person to extra support, leading to a £3.5 billion increase in spending. Also on the difficult-to-sort-out list is university funding. In 40 years, some students could still be paying off their loans for living costs and teaching. Joe and Mia love their film course at Leeds Beckett. So do they think tuition fees should go up?
They could go up, but they need to reevaluate how it would be repaid back. So obviously previously it would be less over a shorter period of time, now it's substantially longer. If they reevaluate it and sort of maybe get employers to help out to try and pay off your student loans, similar to paying like a pension or something like that.
I think that tuition fees shouldn't go up, especially in the cost of living crisis. You're just going to make students not want to go to university when there's so many other options, there's so many different pathways that you could go down.
The man in charge told me it's time for decisions about what universities are worth.
Universities' finances are fragile, and that it just takes a small shift to send a lot of organisations into difficulty. The question for me is, do you see higher education as a cost or an investment? And I think if we're looking at long-term productivity and the future of the economy, it's about time to think of it as an investment.
Education is the second largest area of public spending, and that means taking decisions that shape their future and our economy.
That was Branwen Jeffries reporting, and she's here. Thank you for coming in bright and early. Important to say, we've been talking to people and people have been sending us questions, and we'll talk about some of those in a moment, but education is a devolved issue, isn't it? That's important to say right out at the beginning.
It absolutely is. So education policy in each bit of the UK is set by the government there. So the Westminster election really only affects education policy in England. So that's primarily what we're going to be talking about.
Natalie, in the report, has thought about leaving teaching because of the pay. As with many sectors, for teachers, pay is an issue. Mohammed in London has sent us a question. This is what he said. He said, morale's never been lower and pressures of the job are at an all-time high. Pay awards are not above inflation. I've been a teacher for 6 years and I'm no closer to owning a home than I was when I started out. What are the parties suggesting to tackle teacher pay?
Well, the first decision almost that a new Education Secretary will have to make is the pay offer for teachers in England next year. So not surprisingly, they've been quite careful about the details. We know that the Conservatives prior to the election were thinking about 1 to 2%. Labour haven't committed to a figure on teachers' pay, but are saying they would recruit more teachers. The Lib Dems haven't put a figure on it either. They say they concentrate on having a long-term plan so that every secondary pupil, for example, was being taught by someone who knew that specialist subject. The Greens are saying they'd give a £2 billion pay uplift to teachers, and Reform don't mention it in their contract, their manifesto.
You touched there on recruitment, because obviously pay and recruitment are interlinked. If you want to attract people, you need to pay them what they perceive a good salary. What are the parties suggesting regarding that?
Well, on recruitment, the Conservatives have been pointing to their record of increasing the starting salary to £30,000 to get people into the profession. The Lib Dems say that they would have a workforce strategy in the very long term to try and really think about how you make teaching more attractive. And Labour, of course, have this very specific promise of 6,500 additional teachers for England, paid for by putting VAT on private school fees.
It's great when people get in touch because they get to the nub of the issues, don't they? Because they're living it, they're experiencing it. And Cheryl's emailed saying schools need more funding. Could this come from the income of taxing private schools? And when we talk about tax, it's about the VAT, isn't it? That Labour's proposing.
That's right. So Labour's saying that it would put VAT on school fees. It's worth saying, of course, independent schools hugely varied. Some charge £50,000 a year for a boarder. Others are charging much, much less than that. The average is around £15,000. Independent economists have said that would raise 1.3 to 1.6 billion, and that would cover very roughly the costs of the extra teachers that Labour is promising. It's not really enough to make a difference if you're talking about core school funding, about funding across the whole school system.
Universities saying they're underfunded as well. 17-year-old Jem Grimley says it was recently reported that 40% of universities are in the red, and with tight fiscal rules, more funding seems off the table. So, will they rule out raising student fees and stop university from being unaffordable?
This is one of those subjects that most of the parties have not been keen to talk about. Labour said it would have a review. The Conservatives don't explicitly mention funding. They're focusing more on quality of courses. The Greens have said they would scrap tuition fees, bring back maintenance grants and look in the long term at what graduates who've already gone through university owe. Reform say that they would extend how long graduates repay from 40 years to 45 years, but cut the interest. So it's a very complex area, university funding, but the key thing for people to hold on to is tuition fees are now the bulk of the income. And so if you propose getting rid of tuition fees, you then have to replace it with something else. And tuition fees have been frozen now. They've barely gone up in the last 14 years.
Going back to generally to younger people again, younger than university, special educational needs is something that we quite often talk about on this programme. Rosie in Surrey has sent a question. It's quite blunt, it's quite to the point. She says, in her view, provision for children with special needs is currently catastrophic. What will the parties do about it?
So the Lib Dems addressed this very directly. They say they'd set up a new national body for special educational needs, which would fund the children who've got the highest needs, who are the most vulnerable amongst this group. They also say that they would look at reducing what schools are having to contribute from their budgets by putting some extra money in. The Conservatives haven't spoken about funding. They've concentrated more on creating extra capacity, 15 new special schools, more places for special in specialist schools. The Greens have said £5 billion should go into mainstream schools to try and help them make them more inclusive, to give that support in the classroom.
Some of them do it really well, don't they?
They do it really well, but schools are saying they're really stretched.
Yeah.
They have to come up with the first £6,000. And Labour are focusing more on early intervention. They haven't said what they do about the finances around this, but they want to focus on trying to support children in mainstream. Reform don't mention it at all, and the Greens say they would put £5 billion into mainstream to increase that classroom support.
Thank you to everyone who's emailed. I know your inbox is always flooded, isn't it, when we talk about issues around
I've had
this.
so many emails this week about this, heart-rending stories, and councils too are saying the system is broken. It's on the urgent to-do list for the next government.
There has been a review, hasn't there? I think there is a review going on into funding. Whether or not, I guess that'll progress. I don't know. Thank you, Branwen.
Branwen, thank you very much. That's our education editor.